Greetings, family. This is IyapoNgina, also known as the Road Black Girl, born as Cassandra-Floyd. Thank you again if you're tuning in to the reading of the Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth by Monica Zhu and Barbara Moore. So the last reading that I did, I believe, was on Sunday, and we're going to pick up today. We're only doing 2 chapters today because the chapters from now on out are getting very, very long. And I really want to try to remain disciplined about only reading for an hour. So today, the chapters that we're doing, for those that are following along, for those who don't have the book but would like to follow along for the completion of the reading of the Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth, if you click in the link below, well, actually, if you go into the description, there is a link to the PDF version of the book. So you can get the book for free online. It's PDF. And I encourage you to follow along. Thanks to those of you who are joining. So we began last week with the section that was entitled Patriarchy and Religion. The first section, for those who this might be the first time that you're tuning in, the first 38 chapters were about the greater part of human history, which was entitled Men's Culture and Religion in Neolithic Times. So now we've transitioned into patriarchy. The sun cult, the worship of the sun god, and an all-male priesthood was typically established, as in Babylon and in Egypt, by the edict of a military dictatorship. In pre-patriarchal Egypt, the goddess Nekheb, the vulture, was worshipped in Upper Egypt, and Azit, the cobra goddess, in Lower Egypt. Nekheb was the inventor of agriculture, a great healer and physician, and the bringer of the laws and justice. Egypt was strongly matriarchal, and women encountered. I'll be taking notes along because I'm actually going to be teaching this as a course. Also, just a side note, in the description is a link to the book club that I've started on this book. I've been requested many, many times to start a book club on the Great Cosmic Mother. So the link to that book club on Facebook is in the description below, as well as the PDF version of the book. If you would like to follow along, you can get the PDF online for free. But I will often be taking notes while I'm reading. So in patriarchal Egypt, the goddess Nekheb, the vulture, was worshipped in Upper Egypt. And Uazit, the cobra goddess, and the bringer of laws and justice. Egypt was strongly matriarchal, and women entered and achieved in all professions. Even in later Egypt, women and men studied together in medical schools, and many famous physicians were women. After the invasion of Egypt by Indo-Europeans circa 3000 BC, Lower and Upper Egypt were united under a newly instituted kingship, and the dynastic era began. The invaders, calling themselves followers of Horus, formed an aristocracy or a master race that ruled over all of Egypt. The word pharaoh, the word pharaoh, P-A-R-O, simply means great house, was applied to the royal male alone. Male deities quickly then rose to power over the Egyptian goddesses. Horus, the god of life, was transformed into the official son of the great mother Isis. Isis comes from Aset, the throne, an immortal queen of heaven. Isis incorporated the more ancient Azut, the great cobra goddess who created all existence. She also wore the vulture rings belonging to Nekheb. Together with her brother and moon lover Osiris, Isis was worshipped by the common people far into the Roman times. Her cult became the most important mystery religion of Rome itself, and Isis, with the Horus child, is reflected in the Roman Catholic worship of the Madonna and Child. Isis, like the great goddess everywhere, was the still point of the turning world. Crowned by the lunar disk, she rises from the ocean at night to say, manifestation of all gods and goddesses am I, end quote. In Bronze Age Egypt, the cult of the sun god Ra was introduced by a privileged male priesthood for their own political and military purposes. The older lunar calendar was changed into a solar calendar through the introduction of the 5 intercalary days. To accommodate this new belief, the resurrected moon god Osiris was re-identified by the priesthood with the sun. The people were now supposed to forget what was written on the gate of the ancient goddess Nut. Quote, what there is, what will be, what has been, is me. Nobody has uncovered my chitin. The fruit that I bore was the sun. Instead of being the fruit of the great mother tree, the male governs of the Egyptian dynasties now pretended to have been created by a father god. He, Ptah, was supposed to have created the other gods through an act of masturbation. Right on, Ptah. Ramses II, the Great, was a Bronze Age pharaoh, probably identical with the pharaoh of the biblical record. Ramses II declared himself born by the sun god Ra. During the 67 years of fascistic rule, he hammered his superiority into the heads of the people and had built for him countless temples and palaces stretching from the Nile Delta through Luxor and Karnak to the Sudan. He controlled a victorious army and troops of cheap workers. His political religious edifices already had the characteristics of mass production. And at the age of eight, he owned a harem of women who subsequently bore him 100 children. Moses, the founder of the Jewish Christian Patriarchy, received his education and moral conceptions at the palace of his predecessor circa 1300 BC. Oh my God. Ra, the sun, was believed to fight daily the serpent of darkness, known as Set, later Apophysis. Set was originally the ancient cobra goddess Uzit of matriarchal pre-dynastic Egypt. It was officially declared that law and order were possible only so long as the cobra was kept under the direct control of the pharaoh and his priests. And in this way, they were saving the people from the dark serpent, the dark mother. But just as attributes of the snake and bird goddess Nut were retained in the classic Greek Athena, so attributes of the ancient cobra and vulture goddess Utzet Nekheb were retained in Isis. She wore a cobra on her forehead with cow horns flanked by feathers. Hathor, also ancient matter mother goddess, who symbolized the order of the universe, now became known as the Eye of Horus, that is, the eye of the sun, of Ptah and Ra. The Egyptian word for eye was Uzert, very close to Azit, and Ma'at was the embodiment of the primordial Uranus cobra. To her was assigned ultimate wisdom and danger, rebellion and chaos, and she was allowed to retain qualities so long as she was firmly contained within the male godhead, his eye. And magically guarded by the king. Classless culture of the native Egyptians who worshipped the ecstatic goddess and her energy. They had constantly They had constantly to be held in check by political, military force and priestly dogma. All the religious, spiritual, and cultural values that had been symbolized by the moon of Isis were now strategically transferred by the priest to the sun cult, coming under male control. The surviving moon religion in Egypt remained in the hands of women, but it was the sun god and his stolen powers that publicly ruled. This was the pattern: the sun hero who vanquishes evil in the form of monster serpents or dragons, who dragons was originally a moon hero like Hercules, and as such the sun lover of the great goddess. In Moon Mysteries, he overcame death in ecstatic self-transcendence, experiencing luminous oneness with her. But when he becomes the patriarchal sun hero, he kills the mother goddess in her dark underworld serpent aspect. Instead of transcending his ego, oh my God. All right. Instead of transcending his ego, he transcends the whole world, cosmic union giving way to worldly conquest and destruction of the sources of life. He destroys life in the name of conquering death. Jungian psychoanalysts interpret this process as the liberation of the individual ego, the male ego, of course, from the forces of darkness and the unconscious, i.e., the mother. The hero's action in rescuing, quote, the maiden, the dragon, symbolizes, Jung says, the freeing of his own anima, his essential self, from the devouring aspect of the mother. This almost suggests that woman in herself is merely a projection of the male anima. And indeed, that's what women are in most psychoanalytical systems. Jungians have never shown awareness of the politics of mythology or of the mythology as the history of the pre-literate world. The sun hero is doing more. The sun hero is doing more than liberating ego from his mother. He is liberating his being from responsibility to the being of the world. He liberates himself by arrogantly and recklessly destroying the interconnecting webwork of which he is a part. And then the tragic hero is surprised when he looks around himself and sees nothing but wasteland and death. Alexander the Great slew no dragons. Instead, he slashed through the Gordian knot with his sword. Knots symbolize the goddess as great weaver of life web. Knots are sacred to witches and used in magic spells. Rhyme and meter, in fact, and other poetic chanting devices are linguistic knots to bind up, to concentrate the magic energies of language. The necktie was originally a magic device. Oh my God. Was originally a magic device, a spell knot against throat colds. By impatiently and arrogantly cutting the magic knot with his sword, instead of going into a trance or waiting until he knew how to tie it, Alexander was historically signaling the triumph of the patriarchy. The sun hero slashes through the timeless web of interconnecting life energy and lays it all waste in order to enjoy swift satisfaction, fame, and conquest. Conquest of what? Of the fact that life is paradox. One, the fact that psychic powers are deeply hidden and dangerous, needing to be guarded by wisdom, the serpent guarding the treasure. And two, the fact that their release can cause destruction as easily as integration. The Sun heroes war against the double-edged reality of the cosmic process, slashing through paradox, denying cyclic recurrence and the serpent wisdom that comes with it, refusing to believe that his ego must die before true magic power can be safely revealed. From Murdoch to Superman, he is a little boy warring against the subtle, serpentine nature of life, demanding it made neat, simplistic, logical, unambiguous, designed as a flat stage for his triumph and nothing more. In the second sex, Simone de Beauvoir catalogs male hatred and fear of woman because she presents him with the ambiguities of life and death. His classic response to these ambiguities is denial and conquest. Whew. Quote, the organ the man penetrates is the same. Organ traits is the same as that which gives birth to the child. Man finds it repugnant to come upon the dreaded essence of the mother in the woman he possesses. Is determined to dissociate these two aspects of femininity and tends to keep away from woman during her menses when she is pregnant in lactation. The old woman, the homely woman, aroused hatred mingled with fear. In them reappears the disquieting figure of the mother. When once the charms of the wife have vanished, man wishes simultaneously that woman be animal and plant, and that she be hidden behind an artificial front. He is delighted with his domination of her. End quote. Born from woman's flesh, entering her womb in love, entombed in a female earth and death, man's horror of his own carnal contingents is projected on women and on the world in heroic acts of slashing, denial, and domination. Patriarchal religions and political states are the institutions of this domination, and warfare is its tool, its mechanism. Among the Bronze Age warrior tribes spreading over the Neolithic earth, the acquisition of wealth, raids, and conquest become a powerful factor in dispossessing women, matriarchal cultures, and keeping them dispossessed. The loot from raids and battle belonged to the victorious men, as did the land conquered by sword and broad axe. Women were an important part of the victor's loot. The Bronze Age warriors' world was neatly divided between the victorious male and his spoils, and everything, women, children, animals, land, and resources, all the rest of life constituted the spoils. This is why Patriarchy's inaugural epics and myths, from the Mahabharata of the Vedic India to the Greek Iliad to the heroic age epics of the Hebrew, Teutonic, and Celtic peoples, are all the same: an endless glorification of war. These warrior tales clearly describe a new battle-loving aristocracy that was breaking up the old established matriarchal world order with ferocious quest and formidable iron weaponry. All the ancient unwritten laws of human intercourse were broken up also as the warrior made his own rules, fiendishly designed to make himself come out on top every time. The sun god or sky father of the invaders was everywhere imposed on the indigenous earth and moon worshiping people. Where the great mother was not eliminated entirely, she was married to the conquering sky father. In epic folk tales and she was retold into a harmless, powerless wife. She never appears again with any power except the pejorative powers of jealous, nagging wife or the seductive bad woman, the Jezebel, whore of Babylon, and so forth. The pattern was repeated everywhere. The Sumerians who invaded Mesopotamia circa 3000 BC plundered the superior civilization of the settled matriarchal inhabitants and put their own solar king on the throne. The solar king was surrounded by solar priests who rewrote religion into a mythic spiritual rationalization of war, conquest, and royal hierarchy. Since the sun god rose to power through war and conquest, it follows that the mythology, pop epics, religious doctrine of the worldwide patriarchy should stress and glorify the virtues of warriors. Fascism is inherent in a patriarchal worldview. Come on. Life came to be seen as a battleground. Victor deserves his spoils. The Indo-European Aryan peoples were tall, big-boned, and light-skinned. They entered history with a superior war technology, where wagons drawn by donkeys had earlier been used only to transport goods and travelers. The Aryans turned them into horse-drawn war chariots. Driving these chariots using iron weapons, nomadic Aryans swept down in huge hordes from the regions of the Russian steppes and the Kazakh. In several migrations over millennia into India, Mesopotamia, Greece, Europe, they looted, killed, and enslaved the smaller, darker agricultural goddess peoples who were trying to live in their bloody pathway. Everywhere they settled, the Indo-Europeans established themselves as a priestly, intellectual, warrior elite concerned mainly with military activities and administration of conquered territory. The conquered did the work. Racist theories equating darkness, evil, war, earth, passivity, impurity, inferiority, etc. in a grand master slave equation with Aryans as the masters are everywhere closely bound up with the defeat of the goddess-worshipping woman cultures of the southern regions by iron dynamos from the north. The Celts were of or related to such Aryan origins, called Keltoi by the Greeks, who first recorded them in 900 BC. They were tall, blue-eyed tribes that entered Europe from the east and swept across to the Atlantic. By the 3rd century BC, much of the territory from what is now Turkey to Scotland and Ireland and south through Spain was Celtic. Invaders that they were not patriarchal. Robert Graves has traced their Ogham script back to Anatolia and relates the original Celtic people to the remains of the Neolithic matriarchies of the Near East. Since ancient Anatolia, now Turkey, was once called Galatia and branches of the Celts were called Galatians or Gauls, this connection makes sense. For those that are just tuning in, I will reiterate so that you know that I am reading from The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth by Monica Zhu and Barbara Moore. And we are in the chapter 41, which is entitled The Sun God. Quote, the Roman historian Tacitus wrote of the Celts, their wives are to every man the most sacred witness to his bravery. Tradition says that wavering armies have been rallied by women. They believe that the sex has a certain prescience, and they do not despise their counsels or make light of their opinions. This is talking about Celtic men, Celtic women. End quote. The Celts did not own slaves or believe in capital punishment. Their tribal councils were attended and often presided over by women, and their inheritance of property and also kingship was matrilineal. Their male leaders were elected, and they had a reputation for democratic practices. Whether they had origins similar to the Indo-Europeans or not, as the Celts moved into Europe, they assimilated much of the native Neolithic culture. Ancient pre-Celtic influences survived liberally among Celticized people in Ireland, Wales, Brittany, and the Basque Country, where survivors of the Stone Age matriarchies gathered around the North Atlantic. In Celtic law and custom, women were relatively free and powerful. They enjoyed greater economic, social, and sexual autonomy. They, let's see, they enjoyed greater economic social, and sexual autonomy than women in present-day Britain, France, or America. The early Celtic Christian church was suspect to the Roman Catholic Orthodoxy precisely because it was pro-woman. Women celebrated Mass. Women priests called Conhopite administered the sacramental wine, while male priests distributed the wafers. St. Patrick and Roman Christianity finally ended Druid worship in Ireland, as in England and France, but the Irish church retained much of its pagan mysticism. Wales and Ireland, even in medieval times, preserved Celtic language and literature, including the visionary Olave and the bardic tradition of the goddess with its sacred tree alphabet. John Markle in Women of the Celts notes that the Gauls of France were Romanized very early, accepted Roman patriarchal law along with Roman Christianity. This was not the case in Ireland, Wales, and Scotland, probably because Roman soldiers were never heavily stationed in these British outposts. The Tuath, which is a tribe, was the basic political unit in Ireland, owning the land communally. Cattle, not land, was the basis of wealth and the medium of exchange. Women also owned herds. The ruler of the Tuath was commonly a man, but the queen was entitled to 1/3 of all war booty. There were many famous queen warriors, like the British Queen Boudica in 61 BC. Powerful legendary women like Queen Maeve of Connaught were undoubtedly based on real people. Celtic women owned their own property and were free to choose their mates or husbands. In marriage, women didn't enter legally into the man's family, but retained independent status and property. Desiring divorce, the woman simply took back her belongings and dowry. Marriage, let's see. Marriage was not a religious ceremony, and there was no concept of adultery. There were even annual marriages entered into by both men and women in which both parties agreed to be bonded for 1 year. At the end of each year, the bond was mutually renewed or abolished. Polyandry was practiced. Polyandry was practiced by some tribes. Some children belonged to the whole Tuath, which is, the tribe. Legal contracts were made by the wife independently of her mate, and women were often the economic heads of families, with daughters inheriting equally with sons. Celtic heroes were named after their mothers, and heroism was not confined to men. When upper status Celts officially mated, she gave him a fine horse and a sword, and he gave her a fine horse and a sword. The mutual exchange of nobility was the ceremonial bond. Homosexuality was common among Celts and accepted. Male warriors were frequently lovers. Since sex was not related to religious moralism, but to honor, bisexuality was considered normal. This is a signature of shamanic people. Celtic priests, the Druids, and Celtic auricular priestesses who followed more ancient traditions of ecstatic prophecy were often homosexual or bisexual. The Celtic priestess was similar to the Nordic vulva who traveled to the Scandinavian countryside, setting large platforms covered with pelts from which she uttered prophecy and in trance answered questions about the future. The Voluspa saga, the soothsaying of the vulva, is such an utterance by a legendary seer. Practices link the Druids, Celtics, and Nordic priestesses with the present-day shamans of Asia and the ancient techniques of mantic utterance going back to the European Stone Age caves. When the all-male Highly patriarchal Roman troops entered Europe, as they tell us. They were often confronted by Gaelic, Teutonic, and Celtic tribes led by warrior queens. Roman soldiers engaged in hand-to-hand combat with armed women who they described as equal in size to their tribal men and fiercer in battle. The tribal bond of identity between European women and men made them hard to persuade or defeat. One of the clever devices used by the Roman military to divide and conquer the barbarians was to mock the tribal males for being ruled by women. Okay. Romans took captured men aside and laughed at them for allowing their women to be powerful and influential. The Roman army sold its bill of Roman goods to many Teutonic and Gaelic males, promising them enhanced power and pleasure in the new regime if they would only turn against their women and become the dominators of women like the Romans were. When the tribal males succumbed and disavowed their strong women as leaders and equal partners in war and love, the native tribe Europe collapsed into disarray. And Rome moved into the continent without further serious opposition. Oh, ha. Oh my God. From the beginnings of the sun god patriarchy to the present day, imperialist invaders have used this sex ploy to divide and conquer indigenous people. Come and tell the truth on this day right here, okay? And here we are. To drive a wedge between women and men is the best way to demoralize a people, to get men to despise and control their women is to turn them effectively against the very source of their being, against their mothers, against their partners, against the earth itself. Earth as a being rather than a piece of property. Whenever and wherever it can, imperialism attempts to co-opt this the belief energy of colonized males in this way by challenging their manhood vis-a-vis powerful and independent women. Woo! Y'all ain't heard. Y'all are not listening. Y'all ain't heard. Okay? Y'all ain't heard. Y'all ain't heard. From the beginnings of the sun god patriarchy to present day, imperialist invaders have used this sex ploy to divide and conquer indigenous people. Drive a wedge between men and women is the best way to demoralize a people. To get the men to despise and control their women is to turn them effectively against the very source of their own being, against their mothers, against their partners, against the very earth itself. Earth as a being rather than a piece of property. Wherever and whenever it can, imperialism attempts to co-opt the belief energy of colonized males in this way by challenging their manhood vis-a-vis powerful and independent women. The sun god's troops can always be identified by their manipulative misogyny and by their political relation to women as slaves, not as partners. This characteristic of imperialistic armies then becomes a device, a tool to further demoralize and rob the energies of a colonized people. Through imposition of patriarchal law, religion, and custom, imperialists try to create the conquered two hostile classes of humans, the males versus the female. No longer bound to each other by mutual respect and common history, but by mutual fear, antagonized by mutual guilty need. The manhood energy of conquered males is diverted away from rebellion and revolution. Listen. The manhood energy of conquered males is diverted away from rebellion and revolution and channeled into aggressive macho behavior towards women. Conquered, colonized, and enslaved males are told by their conquerors, in effect, quote, You can beat us, but you cannot can't beat us, but you can beat your women, end quote. The history of imperialism is the history of this device in operation. On the heels of the woman mocking Roman army came the woman cursing Christian missionaries, blaming all the conquered males' troubles on their evil women. Governments and religions manipulate colonized males into a betrayal of their own lives, their own people, by first persuading young men to prove manhood by despising the female. And then native males are enrolled in the armies of their conquerors as terrorists, national guards, or death squads upholding fascistic dictators in power. These young men are rewarded by being allowed to rape, torture, and slaughter their own people, whom they have been persuaded to despise. Thus, the sun god enlists male troops in his war against the female earth and earth's women. Oh, 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 oh. Y'all ain't hearing. Y'all are not hearing the word today. Y'all are not hearing the word today. Y'all are not hearing the word today, okay? Why does this device work? Because the relation between the sexes is always very delicately balanced, very fragile. Balance is maintained by generations of ritual and custom. These are easily destroyed when people are invaded and colonized. Male ontological situation in particular is very fragile. In both hunting and war, men experience the acquisition of things that they have not themselves produced. This can swell the ego's sense of power. Among Mother Goddess Stone Age people, as among Aboriginal hunting and gathering people everywhere, this danger is balanced by ritual appropriation, propitiation, and by strong, intact spiritual perception that life is given, not taken. The aggressive war god ideology of the patriarchy counters this perception, this humble sense of life with another. To the victor belongs the spoils. Under the sun god, for the first time in human history, the male ego is given power over the very source of life. Weaklings wait for the gift to be given. Real men just take it. Oh my God. The Bronze Age celebration of war and hunting, seen as manly virtues and male sport, became precisely the celebration of power over women and over the female earth. It is the products of women's labor, women's bodies, and the body of Mother Earth herself, which are the spoils. Even Freud could see it subliminally. Through her sexual power, he analyzed, woman is dangerous to the community, i.e., the male ego. All social structure rests on her ontological fearsomeness, displaced to the father. Kings and other authority figures are slain by the people, not so they may be free, but so they can take on themselves a heavier yoke, one that protects them more absolutely from the terrible, i.e., exploited mother. The evolution of paternal domination into an increasingly more complex and powerful state system administered by men is thus, in Freud's view, a continuance of the primal repression, which has its primal purpose the ever wider exclusion of women. Freud saw this, but in his patriarchal eyes, such a misogynistic repression and exclusion was necessary for the maintenance of civilization. Historically, imperial troops and native armies do not maintain this repression and exclusion of women by external force arms alone. Patriarchal doctrine is the internal mechanism of oppression, God's pistol in the skull. God's pistol in the skull. European pagans were conquered ultimately not by the Roman eagle, but by the Hebrew sun god Christ. In his name, missionaries preached the ultimate nihilism, the God-willed evil and worthlessness of earthly life, made foul at its source by women's sin, and the apocalyptic goal of complete absorption into the heavenly sun/sun, whose holy fires burn away all flesh. The bomb, of course, is the apotheosis of the patriarchal sun god. Man no longer needs to worship the sun. He can make his own and force the entire earth to bow down before it. Oh my God. The American hemisphere has its own sun god. In legend, Mexican Aztecs to the north of Mexico. Their tribe was ruled over by a witch, Malino Xochi, who had magic powers over wild animals, birds, and plants. In a dream, her brother, Huitzilopochtli, I'm probably butchering these for my Mexica brethren and sister, and you can correct me in the pronunciation. Which he promised the Aztecs would win power and glory not through the old female ways of sorcery and enchanted being, but through male willpower and ruthless conquest through, quote, the strength and valor of heart and arm. Huitzilopochtli was the Aztec war god. Following his priest, the Aztecs overthrew their women and their witch. In one legend, as the moon, a very wicked woman, she was beheaded and dismembered. Some speculate that Aztec rites of human sacrifice began here at the origin of the Aztec identity as sun warriors, with the ritual sacrifice by the war god of his sister, the moon witch. At least here began the Aztec trek south toward Mexico City and many generations of conquest and dominion. Let's see. Nahuatl, great and complex. In its highest reaches, the original bisexual Ometel, the dual lord, creates the world of pleasure. Life is a magic spectacle, Ometel's divine dream, in which human beings perform and entertain him in this ontological, entertain her or him. Let's see. In this ontology, hold on just a second. Sorry about that. Let's see. Okay. In this ontology, I might be interrupted. Anyway, in this ontology, the Aztec intellectual origins as the people of the witch are very clear. Let's see. Quetzalcoatl also was one of the world's most advanced gods of peace, truth, and learning. As the plumed serpent, he represented the shamanic yogic values of snake and bird, self-knowledge, and transcendence through luminous experience of the three. But with growing secular abundance and power, The Aztec sun god, the war god, prevailed. Quetzalcoatl, the god of peace, fled Mexico as a fugitive. The mystic, materialistic worldview of the Aztec sun god religion was elaborated by a priest and royal counselor. That little small wallet right there. Bring it in. By a counselor in 1390A. Chocolate oh, for watching on YouTube, forget, I don't know why my Wi-Fi is acting funny. I'm probably breaking up. Tocqueville declared that the whole purpose of human creation was to provide blood to feed the sun. Was to provide blood to feed the sun. And the Aztec Empire was the official provider of this blood. As a military dictatorship, the Aztec Empire engaged in continuous war for the sole purpose of capturing victims to sacrifice. At the peak of this priestly sun feeding, hundreds of people a day had their chests split open and their hearts torn out. The bloody bodies were tossed down the temple pyramid stairs and piled up at the base. On top of the Solchi Koyo Sochqui stone, a giant circular carving showing the moon witch totally dismembered. Telekel had proclaimed that the tribe were to be plundered for their flesh, the bodies rolled up and offered like warm tortillas to the sun. This was ruled by terror. For some time, the entire social, economic, cultural, and religious life of Mexico was very effectively organized around this terror. Lest we dismiss it as barbaric, we should remember that under the region of the nuclear sun god, attended by his global military priesthood, the entire world is ruled by the same terror. That is the end of chapter 41. Let's see. Okay, so I have a few minutes left. Okay, so somebody's saying that you guys cannot hear the audio on Facebook. I don't know why that would be. Let's see. Okay, all right, great, cool. Okay, so so we're going to continue on chapter 42. For those of you who are just tuning in or coming on late, I am reading from The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth by Monica Zhu and Barbara Moore. We are on chapter 42, which is called The Jealous God. In ancient Sumeria, sheepfold also meant vulva. In Sumeria and Near Eastern myth and custom, the shepherd king was consecrated in a sacred marriage to the queen of heaven, in Anna Ishtar. Under the erotic veils of the beautiful woman, the beautiful young queen was the primordial great mother. She of the fruitful Neolithic garden. As Thompson points out, this shepherd king Dumuzi ensures the prosperity of his people by being a good lover to the goddess Inanna. The biblical King David was also a sacred shepherd. His sensual and ecstatic songs of earthly love, so untypical of the Bible, derive from the ancient love rites of the shepherd king and the goddess. Her Canaanite names were Eshra, Astarte, Ashtoreth. The settled people of the Old Testament, like everyone else in the Near East, practiced goddess worship. The Old Testament is a record of the conquest and massacre of these Neolithic people by the nomadic Hebrews, followers of the sky god, who then set up their biblical god in the place of ancient goddess. The biblical Hebrews The biblical Hebrews were a nomadic, pastoral, and patriarchal people, tribes of sheep herders and warriors who invaded land belonging to the matriarchal Canaanites. Both Hebrews and Canaanites were Semitic peoples. The Canaanites lived in agricultural communities and worshipped the orgiastic, ecstatic moon mother Astarte. As Old Testament stories relate, the Hebrews sacked, burned, and destroyed village after village belonging to the Canaanites, massacring and enslaving the people, a series of brutal invasions and slaughters described typically by theologians and preachers as a spiritual victory. In this way, the Hebrews established themselves on the land, along with the worship of their sky and thunder god Yahweh, Jehovah, calling themselves his chosen people. Yahweh's male prophets and priests, however, despite their political victory over the Canaanites, had to carry on a continuous struggle and fulmination against their own people who kept, quote, backsliding into the worship of the Great Mother. Oh my God. The goddess, the Great Mother, the goddess of all their Near Eastern neighbors. For she had originally been the goddess of the Hebrews themselves. This constant fight against matriarchal religion and custom is the primary theme of the Old Testament. It begins in Genesis with the takeover of the goddess's garden of immortality by a male god and the inversion of her sacred symbols, the tree, the serpent, the moon fruit, into the icons of evil. Of the two sons of Eve and Adam, Cain was made the evil brother because he chose settled agriculture. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Of the two sons of Adam and Eve, Cain was made the evil brother because he chose settled agriculture, matriarchal, and the good brother Abel was a nomadic pastoralist. Patriarchal. The war against the goddess is carried on by the prophets' rantings against the golden calf, the brazen serpents, the great harlot, the whore of Babylon, against enchantresses, pythonic diviners, and those who practice witchcraft. It is in the prophets' war against the Canaanite worship of stone idols, the triple moon goddess, worshipped as three-horned pillars or minars. One of her shrines was on Mount Sinai, which means mountain of the moon. Moses was commanded by the Lord to go forth and destroy these idols, who all had breasts. Oh my God. Okay, hold on a second. All right. We are told monotheism began with the Jews, that it was the great spiritual invention of their religious leader Moses. This is not so. The worship of one God, like everything else in religion, began with the worship of the goddess. Her universality had been duly noted by everyone who had ever studied the matter. Quote, monotheism, once thought to be the invention of Moses or Akhenaten, was worldwide in the prehistoric and early historic world, end quote, i.e. throughout the Paleolithic and Neolithic ages. As E.O. James wrote in The Cult of the Mother Goddess, quote, it seems that Evans was correct when he affirmed that it was a monotheism in which the female form of divinity was supreme, end quote. The original monotheism of the goddess is perhaps the most clearly shown by the fact that in Elizabeth Good Davis's words, quote, Almighty Yahweh, the God of Moses and the later Hebrews, was originally a goddess. His name was IyapoNgina, derives from that of the Sumerian goddess Inanna. Holy shit, y'all ain't heard. Oh my God. Woo! Y'all have not heard what I just said. Yahweh, the God of Moses, was originally the Sumerian goddess Inanna, queen of heaven. Yahweh, like all male gods, was the first bisexual. Yahweh, like all male gods, was first the bisexual goddess herself, then her son, then her lover, then the lover of the goddess, a sheep king. In this process of individuation from the goddess, he first appeared alongside her as in the time of Jeroboam, the goddess shared the temple with Jehovah. Eventually, he was turned by his priests and warrior followers into the supreme and only God. To enforce this new regime, the old goddess religion was damned, her people slaughtered, and the mostly stolen mythology of the new male god was written down by male prophets, a word that also means poet, and thus given textual authority as the word of God. Still, the unimprovable original maintained her influence in the hearts, bodies, and minds of the people. So deeply ingrained was the goddess cult in Palestine that it survived all attempts at drastic reformation by the Yahwites until the end of the monarchy. Baal is of the gods hated so drastically by the biblical Hebrews. Baal is Lord or Baltus, which means mistress and fair one. And this goddess was directly related to the Baal of the witches, Beltane in pagan Europe. Whatever the Old Testament prophets have to say about these heathen idols, we must take very large grains of salt, remembering that the prophets were the leaders of a holy political war against the people who had worshipped the goddess. Moses then was not the inventor of monotheism or the recognition of one God. He was rather one of the chief male priests and architects of the new religion of one male god against the Neolithic goddess. In the book, When God Was a Woman, Merlin Stone suggests that the ruling Levites, the Hebrew priest caste, were in fact of Indo-European, Aryan origin and lineage, belonging to that pastoral warrior tradition of male sky gods, gods of light. In the biblical Leviticus, these Levite priests introduced the earliest, most punitive and misogynistic laws against men yet written down in those times. They seem consumed with the hatred of the goddess of women, especially the Canaanite and other neighboring matriarchal women who in sensual joy and freedom practiced their ancient moon rites. The Levite priesthood were intent on instituting matrilineal property and inheritance rights and the father-dominated family based on women's total submission, social degradation, and spiritual disinheritance. It followed that any sexual, economic, spiritual, or cultural freedom and autonomy in women, their own tribal women, or anyone in the neighborhood was seen by the Levite priest as a threat to their new regime. The Levites were themselves an elite class, like the Hindu Brahmins, living in luxury and serviced by slaves. It is also true that Moses, the tribal leader and chief priest of Old Testament Hebrews, lived at the palace of Ramses II, the great pharaoh dictator of Egypt. Ramses was the secular architect of the sun god political regime in Egypt. Moses resented the captivity of the Jews under this pharaoh and based a good deal of his religious political ideology on this unsustainable resentment, as the Bible records. But Moses was also treated in the pharaoh's palace and was educated there. Doubtless, it was the political success of Ramses' secular spiritual sun god organization that inspired Moses to try to construct the same kind of male god political order for his own people. It also is true that the Hebrews spent generations of captivity in Babylon and the major agricultural goddess people and the new Bronze Age war god leads, original with the Hebrews, but taken by them from Semitic, Babylonian legend and literature. Holy shit, y'all ain't hearing this preaching that's happening right here today. Pre-patriarchal Levite priests and priestesses originated in Sinim, which meant the land of the moon. And they wore headdresses in the shape of lunar crescents. Sin was the Babylonian moon god, and Sin might have been Babylon or Sumer. Both Yahweh and the Islamic Allah began as lunar gods, consorts of the goddess. Oh, shit. Whew. Indeed, the Levite priests were originally serpent priests of the Great Mother. Levi is related to serpent, Leviathan, the world dragon of the great goddess. The biblical Levites derived from Aryan Indo-European roots, or Semites influenced by the all-conquering Indo-European warrior influences of the Bronze Age, we don't know. But just as the later misogynistic and ascetic Essenes were once ecstatic priests of Artemis, it is very possible that the patriarchal religion of the Near East included the biblical religion of Yahweh, began in a violent revolt of these newly wealthy male priesthoods against the goddess they served. In the Gate of Horn, G. Rachel Levy analyzes the character of Yahweh as the psychological historical projection of a Bronze Age people growing apart from their ancient ways. The Hebrew tribes were pastoralists on the move, showing the restlessness of mind and ego characteristic of the Bronze Age. They were no longer immersed in the mutual effort of ritual, the cyclic goddess rituals designed to maintain the equilibrium of seasonal recurrence and the growth and renewal of man and beast. Their concept of God correspondingly became detached from earth as they were experiencing themselves as detached, becoming separated, individuated, chosen as a people no longer bound to the earthly cycles of the mother. As a result of this separation of the divine idea from its natural and animal affinities, the means of contact becomes gradually ethical. It is ironic that the concept of the male god and people's relations to him become more ethical as the behavior of his Bronze Age male followers becomes correspondingly more greedy, violent, plundering, and corrupt. But this is a paradox we cannot resolve. Except to say that ethics can be a substitute for being there. This means the means of contact between the Hebrew tribes and their God was ethical in the sense of becoming more rationalized, linear, individual, and intellectual. The old ecstatic, holistic experience of oneness with the earth and the goddess was gone. God could no longer be known, but instead had to be thought about. Yo. The old ecstatic, holistic experience of oneness with the earth and the goddess was gone. God could no longer be known, but instead had to be thought about and thought towards. The patriarchal priesthood must design verbal descriptions of God in the form of rules for how to act to get God's attention, because God is no longer all pervasively there, looking out from the inside and in from the outside. Ethical maps are written down to tell the mind and soul how to reach something that is acknowledged to be distant. Woo! Y'all are not hearing the preaching that is happening on this day right here. Okay? Listen, ethical maps were written down to tell the mind and soul how to reach something that is acknowledged to be distant. As people separate more and more from oneness within the body, within earth, within the cosmos, religious doctrine takes on the form of instructional maps on how to get there, how to get back. But maps based on God as a misogynistic male cannot take people back to the female source, nor can an anti-earth, anti-physical God return to us the holistic epiphany of body, mind, and spirit inhabited and experienced as one. In Deuteronomy 16:20, it is said, quote, "You shall not plant any tree as an Asherah beside the altar of God," end quote. Asherah was the Neolithic goddess Inanna, Ishtar, Astarte, Ashtoreth, Eshrah, or the symbol of the goddess. It was a conventionalized, stylized, perceived as she, and planted, therefore, at all altars and holy places. This Asherah represented the goddess as Uriketu, the green one, Neolithic mother-daughter of all vegetation, of agricultural knowledge and abundance. Yahweh's absolute hostility toward the Asherah was the political hostility of the nomadic, pastoral Hebrew people, their priesthood at least, to the settled matriarchal cultures and their goddess beliefs. It became a psychological hostility to the entire living earth, doctrinalized in the biblical text. Quote, "You must completely," listen, this is Bible right here, okay? "You must completely, the nations you dispossess have served their gods on mountains, on hills, under spreading tree. You must tear down their altars and smash their pillars, the carved images of their gods, and name from that place." Deuteronomy 16. This hostility, living earth, to its deities and symbols, and to all free manifestations of its life, sometimes be seen in the way some fundamentalist and especially Mormon churches are built, at least in the American West. Every green tree, flower, or bush is stripped away from the stark stone anti-terrestrial arrogance of the buildings. The Old Testament texts record the heroic age of the Hebrew people, the war god epics of their priestly and warrior castes. The Bronze Age saw an explosion of such epics out the Near East, Egypt, and India. Gilgamesh appeared as the ego of man, a new male being building a hostile identity vis-a-vis woman, mocking and dismissing the ancient mother goddess in acts ranging from ritual desecration and mythic rewriting to the sacrilegious rape, massacre, and plunder of whole settled peoples. In the Old Testament of the Bible, written circa 900 to 300 BC, this ego of man is set up as the Hebrews' new god. Yahweh, the pastoral god of cattle breeding, warfare, moralistic wrath, and misogyny, is the newly militant, self-aggrandizing, and righteous male ego enthroned as God the Father, the enemy of the mother. Bronze Age raiding, mass slaughter, and the secular conquest of settled matriarchal peoples by the mobilized patriarchal war machine were ubiquitous activities, not confined to the Hebrew tribes. The new element added by the Old Testament writers was the concept that became holy war. The Father God not only justified, but commanded the slaughter of religious enemies, i.e., of people who believed differently. In particular, of people who believed in the old religion of the Neolithic goddess. The Hebrew warriors then were not just seeking conquest and wealth for personal glory, like other Bronze Age sun god warriors and epic heroes. No, their righteousness comes from the fact that they were also seeking to impose the right God, their new idea of the right God on all of their neighbors. Textually, the Old Testament becomes the first handbook of holy war, i.e., the first time such an ideology was written down as the rules of the game, as the game itself for a whole people. Both Christianity and Islam recognize the Old Testament as a sacred text. The historic fanaticism of both religions derives its holy war fervor and rationale from the words of the biblical prophets, presented as the word of God. These words incite and justify religious war as the will of God. As the will of God, or the word of God. These words incite and justify religious war as the will of God. Yahweh is called the jealous God. Excuse me. Yahweh is called the jealous God. What was Yahweh jealous of? Of the goddess and her lover, of their sacred sexual relation itself, and of its dominion or its domination over the minds and hearts and bodies of generation of Neolithic people. This is why the God and the religion of the Bible are identified so clearly from all other preceding gods and religions. The Bible God and his religion are based on a violently asexual or anti-sexual morality never before seen on earth. Sex, the source of life and pleasure, the source of life, of pleasure, and of love, becomes the enemy of God. Oh my God. Yo. The Bible, God, and his religion are based on a violently asexual or anti-sexual morality never before seen on earth. Sex, the source of life and pleasure of love, becomes the enemy of God. All the ancient people of the world embodied the fused birth, life, and death-giving powers of earth in a mother goddess. Recognition of this paradoxical functioning of the earth was universal. The Bronze Age Hebrews apparently perceived this primordial paradigm of earth as birth mother, sex mother, and death mother, all three in one, and couldn't handle it. They feared and or resented it so profoundly that in their religion, unique among all world religions, they wholly exterminated the mother and her earth, and thereby evolution of itself and the cycles of its processes from their concept of deity. Nothing of sacredness remains but Yahweh, the war and morality God, Yahweh, who alone among all male gods of the earth never has intercourse with a female. The yang has its yin. Sky fathers have earth mothers. Even the Vedic and the later Indian male gods have female principles or other halves or wives with which they copulated. Not Yahweh. Yahweh is the only male God in the history of the entire world who never made love to a female or to the earth. In Christianity, this extraordinary phenomenon is continued in a son born without sex from a sexless virgin mother who counsels his male followers to eschew sex and femaleness forever if they want their spirits to reach heaven. Thus did the ancient Hebrew Bible writers deal with their male fear and hostility toward the female sex by eliminating the female sex entirely from the creation and purpose of the world. Biblical misogyny was not exclusively a spiritual opposition to the goddess on the part of Yahweh's priesthood, It was also a part of the Bronze Age political project of dominating large numbers of people via a royal priestly elite. Female blood was a sacred element in the agricultural rituals of the Neolithic people, including the matriarchal Canaanites. Blood was poured over sacred stones. Female blood, menstrual blood, was the signature of the psychic physical bonding of humans to the blood of their mothers and of the mother. Thus, in Leviticus, the Levite priests wrote down extremely punitive taboos and spiritual laws against female blood, menstrual blood, childbirth blood. What had been sacred for so long, the mother's bleeding for life, was rewritten as a process of filth, shame, and spiritual corruption. When we know the significance of the ancient complex woman moon menstrual blood in the Neolithic regions of humanity and stretching back beyond even the Paleolithic, no doubt, then we can see the biblical portrayals of menses, woman, and sex as icons of filth and evil as a preeminently political move. This move was designed to take control over human life and over the burgeoning Neolithic abundance by destroying the original communal bonding of people through the blood of their mothers, and to replace this with an enforced hierarchic bonding based on the pastoral idea of a father god, keeper and breeder of herds, i.e. herds of cattle, capital. Female blood is tabooed, is no longer the medium of a spiritual communal bond. The new covenant is made with male blood from the foreskins of circumcised male infants. This new tribal bond was elitist as well as sexist. The tribal god Yahweh was elevated to a one and only universal God, but still Yahweh was believed to recognize only the blood of Hebrew males in this special bonding, i.e., only Hebrew males can achieve this special relationship with God. For something like sacred group bonding menses to be denigrated to a corrupt process as it is in the Bible required a psychic overturning that was enormous. It wrenched the sexes out of balance. To this day, we have still not recovered in the West from that act of primary alienation from the source of our earthly lives. No matter how sophisticated our technologies or how secular our lifestyles, we in the West, because our culture is so historically saturated with biblical imagery and worldview, still tend to be ruled by archetypal models of a male pastoral God whose power comes from not giving birth or enhancing life, but from dominating and breeding cattle herds as a sign of egoistic individual wealth, and dominating women as unclean but profitable cows as well. The puritanical morality of the Old Testament comes in some part from a misconstruing of ancient ritual and taboo. As Theodore Roszak points out in Where the Wasteland Ends, the Hebrew prophets looked at Epiphany and saw idolatry. Just so, they looked at ancient sacred technologies and saw moralisms. Pagan Neolithic people did not have sex morality systems per se. Sex was sacred. Flesh was a manifestation of spirit, but spirit was related to energy, human and divine energy, and energy was experienced as easily imbalanced, mischanneled, or wasted. Pagan people designed rites of purification or energy concentration for special activities or occasions in which the soul energy was at risk through the intensity of the encounter or change it would be undergoing. The soul, as the sense of personal identity and belonging, was at risk in archetypal ontological situations: birth, puberty, mating, killing, eating, and death. So men would undergo at least 3 days of sex abstinence before a hunt or battle. Ritual abstinence and purification were undergone before a mating or birth, or at puberty, or after death. These purification concentrations of spirit energy were a way of encountering any major life change or soul transformation which could threaten the balance of identity, personal, and communal life, transpersonal. Whether these were or were not related to sexual activity, these ritual purifications were not moralisms. They were in the phase of they were in the phrase of Mircea Eliade and Jerome Rothenberg, technologies of the sacred, ritual means of focusing and maintaining spirit energy in all crises and archetypal transformations. The sacred among pagan people is related to magic simply because both are experienced as energy arts, techniques of gathering and directing energy toward a numinous or transphysical goal. When the Hebrew prophets overthrew the great goddess in her pagan religion, they kept many of those purification techniques. But divorced them from magic or spirit arts. In doing this, they created moralism, i.e., one abstains from sex at certain times, not to focus mind body energy, but because sex is bad or immoral. The Judeo-Christian religious systems, in their own worldviews, have wholly denounced and extirpated the magic rites and reasons behind purification ceremonies, but retained the purification technologies themselves, ending up with a psychological fetish for cleanliness, purity, etc. Cleanliness is next to godliness and so forth. Really, since God is everything, cleanliness runs a very poor second. Sexual moralism builds on this fetish to a pathological degree, filling people with an alienating sense of their own and others' bodily filth, with a fear and abhorrence of the body and its activities, and with the projective systems that insist on the uncleanliness of strangers and others, including the doctrines of racial purity and racial impurity. These sex moralisms and purity fetishes, originally a misreading of pagan energy channeling techniques, have laid the basis and foundation for racism as well as misogynistic sexism. They also lead to revulsion against the sick, the elderly, and the disabled. In the Old Testament, priests of Yahweh were required to be pure, i.e., physically perfect. No person with an illness, with a handicap or blemish or non-male body style, no blind or deaf person, no lame person, no epileptic, no incontinent person, no dwarf or hunchback, and no woman whatsoever is allowed to approach the altar of God. Not because their energy might be temporarily or accidentally diffused or unbalanced, but because they are unclean in the eyes of God, i.e., spiritually inferior. Biblical homophobia is another manifestation not only of sex moralism, but of the Hebrew prophets' political hostility toward the people and practices of other religions, specifically goddess religion. As Thompson writes, quote, "The image of bisexuality is universally stressed in shamanistic practices," end quote. The excessive Hebrew condemnation and punishment of homosexuality, which was, after all, a common and universal Neolithic practice, was not simply a revulsion toward a particular, quote, unnatural sexual activity. It was an attack on all shamanistic, ecstatic religion against the bisexual image, theory, and practice of the great goddess. The balancing of female and male energies was always the goal of Upper Paleolithic and Neolithic religions. Bisexuality, male homosexuality, lesbianism are the symbolic and real enactments of this balancing vision to live the other in the self, to live the self in the other, to free oneself from gender by enlarging gender experience through total experience. As stated in their text and doctrine, as stated in their text doctrines, the spiritual goal of the pastoral Hebrews, of the pastoral Hebrew prophets and kings, was the separation and mutual hostility of the female and male energies. Their ultimate political goal was the punishment of the female by the male to the degradation of both. Biblical homophobia and the condemnation of people engaging in homosexual acts to death by stoning, the cursing of homosexuals beyond the grave, was a direct consequence and mechanism of the Hebrew prophets' project to vilify and destroy goddess cultures as evil while setting up their own anti-sexual god in her place. Homophobia is a necessary psychological attribute of the religion of Yahweh, i.e., if Yahweh never has sex with a female, goddess or mortal, nor never has sex with a male, then what is Yahweh? He is pure spirit. That is, a Hebrew male above sex, above life. This is supposed to indicate Yahweh has transcended or outployed the Neolithic great goddess. What effect did this new Yahweh of the biblical prophets have on the lives of Hebrew women who, like all other Neolithic women, had once enjoyed the freedom, dignity, and dynamic energy of living as women in the universe of the goddess? That is a story for Jewish women to tell. It seems historically true that as Christian feminist theologian Rosemary R. Ruther writes, Hebrew women of biblical times were the first to undergo a God-willed social, physical, and spiritual oppression that has since become the experience of all women in the West and in the East under the various forms of the same patriarchal, misogynistic worldview. The picture of woman obtained from the Old Testament laws can be summarized in the first instance as the legal non-person, where she does not become visible. As a legal non-person, where she does become visible, it is a dependent and usually inferior in a male-centered and male-dominated society. Under the purity taboos of Leviticus 12, it was ordained that Hebrew women who gave birth to sons were unclean for 7 days and must purify themselves for 33 days following childbirth. A woman bearing a daughter is unclean for 66 days, and she must then make a sin offering as an atonement for bearing a female. In 1 Samuel 21:4, it is said, quote, "Men are holy who stay away from women." Yahweh and his prophet had a strong urge to punish Hebrew women for their sensuality, vivacity, and autonomy under the goddess. Here is one of many such passages from Isaiah 3:16, 17. Moreover, the Lord saith, because the daughters of Zion are haughty. Oh my God. Because the daughters of Zion are haughty and walk with stretched forth necks and wanton eyes, walking and menacing as they do, and making a tinkling with their feet. Therefore the Lord will smite with a scab the crown of the head of the daughters of Zion, and the Lord will discover their secret parts. End quote. Meaning, sexual punishment, sexual humiliation, pejorative sexual epithets are disturbingly common in this book of male prophets and holy men. As Ruth Hunrance Green says in her wonderful book, The Born Again Skeptic's Guide to the Bible. Oh shit, I gotta get this book. The Born Again Skeptic's Guide to the Bible. Quote, the prophets are faithful in recording the Lord's propensity for humiliation of the female sex by comparing sinful cities and nations to it. End quote. The trashing of, quote, evil cities following other religions as whorish, harlots, places of fornication is common to Yahweh and his prophets. But Hebrew cities do not escape the continuous flow of misogynist cursing either, as in Lamentations 1:17. Jerusalem is as a menstruous woman. When holy war mentality is joined with such woman hatred, there is the targeted slaughtering of women and children as blood bearers of the hated neighboring religions and cultures. The book of Ezekiel reeks with it, slaying utterly old and young, both maids and little children and women, but come not near any man upon whom is the mark. Fill the courts with the slain. Ezekiel 9, verse 6 and 7. In the Old Testament is the metaphor of the king who builds his house above a privy. This seems to refer to ecstatic, orgiastic rites practiced by the Canaanites in the honor of the goddess, which the Hebrew patriarchs and prophets could not see as anything but prostitution and vile whorishness. The opinion of the Hebrew patriarchs that human sexuality is basically vile and of the gutter, ultimately of the devil, was echoed centuries later by Tertullian, an intellectual father of the early Christian church, who proclaimed that woman is a temple over a sewer. That is the end of chapter 41, entitled The Jealous God. So as I promised on Sunday, I am going to be a lot more disciplined / deliberate, if you will, in reading regularly and not like so spontaneously. So the schedule that I've set for myself, and I'll put that in the description below. The schedule that I've set for myself until we're done with this book is Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 2 p.m. I will be continuing to read The Great Cosmic Mother to its completion. We still have about, let's see, we're on chapter 43, and I think there's 57 chapters, 52 chapters. Yeah, there's 52 chapters. Okay, yeah, so we have 9 chapters left, but they're very long. They're almost half the book. So as the chapters get longer, I'll reduce the number of chapters. But if you want to follow along, go into the description. There is a link to the PDF so that you can read the book online for free, or I would encourage you to purchase it because you'll be taking notes in it forever. This is my 4th time reading it. Every time I read it, something new comes out, and I'm taking notes in real time. So I would encourage you to buy the book, but in the meantime, if you want to start following along with me reading, then go ahead and link on the PDF. I will be reading every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Also in the description below is a link to the book club that I initiated on Facebook. So I'll start engaging in that more. I'll start doing like questions and answers and highlights from the previous readings, and then facilitating discussions. So, you know, if you enjoyed it, if it hit you like it hit me, subscribe, like, and definitely share. Share this information with others. We're not just reading about history. We are analyzing what we're presently engaged in. And once you hear these chapters and you hear these words, you can see in real time what we are confronted with right now. And this is the origin of it. 6,000 years of patriarchal religion imposed and embedded in the consciousness and the flesh of the entire population of the planet Earth. And we are at the apex of this quagmire. The end is in sight. That's what we're experiencing. The end of the age of patriarchy is coming to an end. It's in crisis and fighting to maintain its hegemony on the planet, right? And so we have to know the origin of what we're looking at in order to create a real solution. And I'm sorry, I am not trying to offend anybody, but demonstrating about Roe versus Wade, demonstrating about this thing or that is not the answer to dismantling this shit. We have to know the beginning. We have to know the origin. People of color in particular have to take a scary, deep, introspective view into our own history and the roles that we have played in the place that we are right now. We all have work to do. We all have skeletons that are begging to have the light shone on them. We are all, baby, this is it. This is it. This is the time where rights can be wronged, where redemption can be had. But we have to face us. We have to face the world, and we have to face the ugliness of the history of it if we are to undo what has been done and create a new future. This is real. This is something that we can bring about in real time. So I want to encourage you to read this book. For those who tuned in late or caught the ass end of it, the book is The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth by Monica Zhu and Barbara Moore, written in 1987. That's all I have to say about that. This is IyapoNgina, also known as Cassandra-Floyd, the rogue black girl. Today is Wednesday, so join me again on Friday at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for the reading of The Great Cosmic Mother, where we will begin with chapter 43, The Split in the Garden. Have an awesome day.